Disclaimer. Opinions expressed are those of the content creators and do not represent any employer or entity. The information shared is for informational purposes only and should not be construed as medical advice or used in any legal capacity, including establishing standards of care. All efforts have been made to comply with HIPAA regulations. No guarantees are made regarding the accuracy of statements or opinions provided. Interaction with the podcast does not establish a doctor-patient relationship. Please enjoy this podcast responsibly.
All right, welcome back to Pod Patrol with your host, Dr. Jeff Dykes.
And Dr. Leland Jaffe.
Today we are joined by Dr. Jeffrey Jensen, the Dean of the Arizona College of Podiatric Medicine. Thanks for joining us today.
Thanks for having me, guys. Appreciate the invite and great to connect on a Sunday afternoon.
Yeah, absolutely. So for those who don't know, which I'm sure is very few, you are the host of the Dean's Chat podcast. So we are either rivals or brothers in arms. I haven't quite decided which, but I think I like the second one better. We work together. And so what made you start that podcast?
Well, I think it's synergy. I think the two podcasts give synergy, so we're better than we would be if we were by ourselves.
Yeah, that's a good way.
About a year and a half ago, I was a guest on a podcast, and I thought I just liked how the system went, and I liked the ability to work in a studio, and I really appreciated their expertise because I don't have the technical expertise, or I didn't at the time, and I thought to myself, this would be great to do for our profession. There's so many wonderful doctors in our profession. There's so many different areas of podiatric medicine, from practitioners to politics to residencies to the colleges. And I thought it'd be a neat opportunity to perhaps display all the talent in our profession. So on the back of a piece of paper, I wrote down 50 names of people I knew in all those different areas. And I signed up for a year's worth of podcast. And then the rest is history, kind of.
That's awesome. And then it's kind of taken off on its own. I think the more people listen to it, the more it kind of grows and the audience grows and people hear about it. And then, such and such wants to be on there, or, hey, if you talk to this other person. And it's kind of interesting how that happens. We've kind of felt that a little bit initially, even though we're still kind of getting our feet wet, is people reaching out, wanting to be on the podcast. So I think that's a good sign that people are interested in the field. So I always joke with my wife that when we go to ACFAS, we see people that we know and we call it Podiatry famous. So if you're Podiatry famous, when you go to ACFAS, you're like, oh, do you know who that is? I know them. So you're going to be Podiatry famous. If you weren't already, you're going to be Podiatry famous every time you go to one of those conferences. So I'm not sure if that's what you were going for.
No, not at all. I wanted to, actually, the real reason was to increase our visibility of the profession, and hopefully through working with all the colleges and interviewing all the deans and the different faculty, we would be able to enhance our recruitment efforts, and that was a big part of it.
At the college level, I think being present in that space is incredibly important. But what's interesting too is because I work in the clerkship and residency placement office at our college, and more and more I can see residencies really leaning on different social media outlets and podcasts and ways to get their name out there, because some of the students truly gain and gather most of their information through these different through these different social media outlets. It's pretty wild.
Yeah, it's interesting. When you least expect it, you hear kind of a unique story. I had a doc who's head of an academic health center email me one day, and he said, I just interviewed a doctor for a position we have open, and he had done an interview with you on Dean's Chat, so he watched the interview before he interviewed him for the position, and he said, I felt like I knew him even before we did the interview. So I think that's kind of cool. You never know where it's going to go,
Oh, absolutely.
So have you seen any uptick yet in terms of awareness? I'm sure that's kind of hard to measure unless someone directly says, hey, I heard your podcast or something like that. But maybe if they've...
Yeah, kind of. I mean, there's different avenues, right? I think anytime that, whenever I put out a YouTube video and the guest is a part of one of the colleges, I add it to the playlist for that college. So Des Moines has a playlist, Shoal has a
Mhm.
playlist, we have a playlist. And so I think that helps because what I do is I copy the playlist links and I send them to the deans so they can put them into their admissions information.
Hmm.
But on the other hand, what we've also done is working with AACPM and Feet on the Street. I've given them 100% access to all the videos, and they've taken little snippets of interviews with students and people in the profession, and they've turned little ads out of those, and they've boosted them on Instagram and TikTok
Mhm.
and YouTube, and it's incredible actually. Many thousands of impressions. Those don't count so much, but the actual clicks on the link to Explore PodMed website is over 10,000 in each of the areas. So, I mean, in order to get people aware of the profession, if they don't know about it, it's great to have them click on the Explore PodMed website. So that's happening. Although we just got our stats for applicants this year, and not counting the Texas school because they have a different kind of application service within the state. We are at 719 applicants this year. We had 716 the year before, and
Okay.
716 the year before that. So we're at least we're not going downward like we did for 4 years in a row. I mean, we
Hmm.
were trending to have less than 600 applicants a couple of years ago. So we're,
Yeah.
I mean, it's not jumping up like I was hoping. But, a lot of the events we do, we're interfacing with second years, third years, not just fourth years getting ready to dive into professional school.
Yeah, I'm encouraged. I think that there's so many of us and other people out there that are trying to make a lot of noise in different spaces about how awesome this profession is. So I think hopefully we've kind of hit that bottom, and we're going to see an upward trajectory as we kind of inch forward year after year. I know it's very regional, but something that I'm noticing in the Midwest, and Jeff, you might notice as well too at Iowa, is there's more and more pre-podiatry clubs at some major universities, which is exciting to see. I never had that, or at least I wasn't aware of it when I was at school. So to see that, I think is really exciting. And, I think that getting them excited about this profession early on is so important. Um, get that passion building early so that it's not necessarily something they discover when they just don't get into allopathic medicine, right? This is something that they're intentionally going for.
That's a good point. I think also it's fun to see entities outside of the colleges doing recruitment.
Hmm.
ACFAS is actively involved, ABPM, ABFAS. It's great to see everybody all hands on deck.
Sure.
The docs in practice that are interfacing with the local students that are interested in podiatry really make the most impact on them and give them the most impression about about our profession and whether or not they should think about jumping into it.
So I want to go back for a second. So let's go back before we go forward. So you went to the California College of Podiatric Medicine and did residency at Kern Hospital in Michigan. So you have an episode of Dean's Chat where you kind of go through your history and talk through a lot of that stuff. So as opposed to kind of rehashing that, I would steer people towards that episode of Dean's Chat to hear kind of your history and how you got into all that stuff that you've been into in terms of starting the residency in Colorado and being dean in Miami and now dean in Arizona. So I'm not glossing over all that stuff. I think, and for the sake of not being redundant, people can listen to that episode and we'll kind of take it to the next level. So you hold 14 patents, including the Total Contact Easy Cast. So how was that process? Because I assume you come up with an idea, and I have had lots of ideas, and then you get kind of stuck, and you're like, well, now what do I do? I don't have X amount of thousands of dollars to get a patent, right?
Right.
So what was that process like for you? We'll go back to the first one that you had, because then after
Sure.
that, it probably made a lot more sense.
Sure, and they get easier as you do them, like anything, right?
Right.
So I was very fortunate coming out of Kern. I went into a practice that did a lot of clinical trials, and so I did a lot of the initial trials on dermograft, apigraft, other growth factors, and it was very evident to me that these clinical trials, and they're pouring millions and millions of dollars into them, weren't offloading the patients in the trial. So it didn't matter if they got the drug or they got the placebo. The
Hmm.
patients weren't healing in a timely fashion. almost all those trials had healing rates in about the 30% for the placebo and barely 50% for the drug or the device or the graft. So I thought to myself, I did a ton of total contact casting when I was at Kern. We had a diabetic foot center, but I knew full well that people didn't want to go through the process of learning how to put on a cast and 14 steps, and it's operator dependent. And God forbid the doc who puts the cast on isn't in clinic the day it needs a change, things like that. So I was just bent on finding a way to develop a new offloading device that was easier to use, and that if it was easier to use, the docs would use it if it could have efficacy similar to a traditional total contact cast. Mm-hmm. So I'll shorten this up a little bit for you. I tried hard. I went and I spent $5,000 with a patent office. These attorneys in Denver, they came back to me and they said, no, you can't do this. You're infringing on other people's patents, blah, blah, blah. So I actually met with a group that wrote NIH grants. And they told me that if I bring my idea, it's a 50-50 split. And I was in charge of writing all the technical aspects. They would do the business aspects. They will bring in the engineers. And that turned out to be a very wonderful collaboration where I got my first couple $1 million worth of NIH grants to develop products. And once I had that money, it was easy to get patents because I felt like we had a roadway, if you will, to an end game of having a product that we could put on the market. So a bunch of my patents are around offloading devices. Every time you turn around, when you invent something and it comes out, it's good, but it could be better, right? So you figure out a way to make it better, then you patent protect it. So I've had a really enjoyable time doing that. I got really good at, we had patent attorneys, of course, but I got pretty good at writing patents, and I actually think some of my better ideas didn't get patented because I was infringing on people's space. It was hard to get around.
Oh, no kidding.
Yeah. So anyways, it was fun. The only one that hit, though, out of all of the patents I have is the TCC Easy. And that was really fun because I had to raise money to actually build a company. I had the grant money, but that was just for development. But starting a company, getting a board of directors together, getting production, getting sales, getting marketing, getting the ability to run a company, that's a whole different skill set too. So
what did you study in undergrad?
I was exercise science major in undergrad, and then I went to exercise physiology for my master's degree. And I don't know, my wife's a CPA too, that helps. So in the business realm, but still, when you're doing patents and things, is not unlike podcasting, where you dip your toe in the water. Next thing you know, you dove in head first, and then you're like, okay, now what do I do? And once you're committed and once you're in, you just make the most of it and get better and better. And that's kind of what happened with my patents and research.
Sure.
We're still waiting to get better and better at podcasting. Hopefully that comes at some point.
I mean, fortunately, in 2024, in 2024, there's a lot of people on YouTube that want to teach you how to do anything. So you can pretty much figure it out online.
But we're in the same space trying to find the right niche, find the right way to contact with people that want to, give an hour or 35 minutes minimum of their day to listen to what we're putting out there is a big ask because people are busy and they're being inundated on all fronts, social media and otherwise. So I think it's cool. I remember when people started downloading my podcast, I thought, oh my God, I can't believe it. 10 people listen to my podcast today. So, that's just a good feeling that people are willing to listen and then come back for more.
Yeah, that's what my wife asked me. She's like, how do you know if you're successful? And I was like, I don't know. We're going to keep doing it because we're having fun and we like talking to interesting people. So it's certainly not something I'm going to retire on. So let's just have a passion project. Yeah,
it's a passion project, and I think you're about at the point I was last year. How many episodes? You're at 20-ish, right? 20 or so.
Yeah, about that.
I told myself at 20 I would make a decision if I was going to go forward or not, and at 20 I was going to make the decision to get a website and invest in the website to put the podcast on so that I could do search engine optimization through YouTube. Through Google. Because YouTube is owned by Google. So that's quite a business they have there. You know how that goes.
Yeah.
I think anything like this takes time. That's kind of how I was with my other website. Like I will be at 1 year in October. So
really?
that's when I started. I'm like, I'm going to do it for 1 year. try to be consistent throughout the year, and then reevaluate and see, is this actually worth my time? Is it, but like you said, I think when you have a passion project and you're trying to put your creative energy out into the world without expecting anything in return, I think, there'll be good karma, good things will come your way, I think.
I found that to be true in many facets of life, right? So I agree with that. Now, Leland, you are a workhorse. I get your emails every day. I get the quizzes every day. You're online. I was like, holy cow, Leland's going for it.
I was going to say the opposite, because I'm impressed by you. So, because you're, I have an administrative role at our college. But wow, you're at the helm of your college and you're doing these podcasts and you're all like, how do you balance your day? How do you balance your time?
Well, I do one afternoon a week of podcasts. And so it's dependent upon, Joanna Ritchie, she's one of our faculty here. She and I are working together and we're co-hosting. And truth be told, since Joanna joined me as a co-host, we've had a very interesting guests join us, and she's got connections to people I don't have, and vice versa. So she's been wonderful. But depending upon her teaching schedule, we only do podcasts either Monday afternoon or Tuesday afternoon. And I try to do 2 of them back to back, because if I'm going to drive to the studio and spend all that time, I just book 2 guests, and then they're 40-45 minutes usually. So it's worked out pretty good. And then I don't do editing and things. I mean, I have editors. They do the uploading to Libsyn. We use Libsyn. I don't know what you guys use. I'm not sure. Buzzsprout maybe, or
Spotify for podcasts.
Spotify. And so anyways, it's been interesting. I think both of us got in at a good time, because a couple of years ago the push was pure podcast. Don't do YouTube or Spotify videos. So I think the fact that we started with the videos and the podcasting together is really going to be a benefit long term for our podcast.
Yeah, it's a lot more work, but yeah, I think it's worth it.
Yeah, but you know what? I think that if you're on a podcast only, how do you get known? How do you get out there? It's hard.
Yeah, you really do. I mean, I think what you're doing also with the short form video, with the long form video, is really important as well. It's funny. Go ahead. Sorry.
No, I just got super lucky, because in making these super short videos from some of our longer ones, and having AACPM use them in their advertising for the profession, it's really attracted a ton of people too. So that's helped.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. How often do you allow yourself to check metrics and like Google Analytics? Because I can find myself getting so bogged down with like the day-to-day ups and downs of how people respond to content that you put out there.
Right. I get an email when someone makes a comment on one of my videos. I find myself on LinkedIn. I kind of use that as a metric too. Just because if impressions on LinkedIn are directly related to the number of people that are watching the video. So, you can't help but load it up on YouTube and look at views, or you can't help but I look at Libsyn, and it has my monthly and my daily totals. And it's so predictable, right? You release a podcast, you get X amount, then it drops. You release another one, you get X amount, and then slowly but surely it grows. And it takes a lot of patience, I'll tell you.
Yeah. I think I sort of make the analogy of, the analytics, like looking at the stock market. If you look day to day, it goes up and down, but if you zoom out long enough, it's going to go up. So just be patient.
I think that's good strategy.
It's
like watching paint dry otherwise.
Yeah. That's right.
I like to look at our podcast numbers. We release at 6 a.m. on Sunday. So I like to look at the numbers at like 6:30 and see how many views there are, because there's always some, and I'm wondering who's sitting there. They're probably listening. Hello. They're sitting there clicking refresh, like, when's this episode going to come out? I'm like, really? It comes out at 6 a.m. on Sunday, and I've already got like 8 views. I'm like, all right, good for you.
It's funny you mentioned that, Jeff, because I think what happens is some people sign up to have our podcast downloaded as soon as they're released. So if you click on, like you said, an hour after it's released, I mean, I'm the same way. I'll have like 20 downloads already, and I'm like, there's no way. So somehow, some way, people are downloading as they get released, I think.
I'm just picturing people in their pajamas on Sunday morning, sitting there like drinking their coffee, watching Pod Patrol, like, all right.
That's
I'm
good.
in.
Hey, who's going to argue with that?
I like that visual.
Yeah, going back to patents here for a second. So
Sure.
I think that's an interesting thing because I've had some ideas for some projects and met with different companies and made some headway, but didn't ever actually kind of come to any kind of agreement. And I have a friend who designed and developed a total ankle patent and spent $300,000 of his own money only for a company that shall remain nameless to change like one or two little things and release it under their own patents.
Mm.
So, I mean, there's a lot of money involved. And
Yeah.
so I think it's hard for surgeons to take that leap into trusting whoever it may be
Yep.
and putting all of their money into these projects, not knowing what's going to come out on the other end. So I think the NIH component of what you did was smart.
Right. And I also had a vision of building a product and getting X amount of top line sales. My vision was that we'd sell the company based on top line sales, not profits, because we were putting all of our money into more salespeople to build the top line. And I think there's multiple ways of valuing a company. The top line, multiples of top line, I think are good for small medical companies because we're selling to our peers, and it's not like we're trying to sell a new garden chair or something,
Mm-hmm.
So the answer to your question, though, Jeff, is I put a ton of money into it.
Yeah.
My wife and I joke around. We had 4 kids under the age of 10, and I had $50,000 worth of patent bills.
Wow.
And I remember thinking to myself, am I crazy, or is this just, am I super passionate about this and confident in a good way, or am I just hopeful? I had a lot of doubts at times. I got to be honest with you.
It's hard because I think all my ideas are great. And so it's like, was this a great idea? Of course it's a great idea. I thought of it. So you want to go, I like go around to all my co-residents and after I got out to all the other doctors, like, hey, what do you think about this idea? They're like, oh yeah, it's a pretty good idea. All right. Well, what do you think about this idea? And they get enough people to say, yeah, like, yeah, that's a good idea. Then you're like, okay, all right, maybe it is actually a good idea.
Well, I like to talk about the TCC EasyCast because that's been very successful, right? I think Integra owns it now, and they've sold over $300 million worth of them. So it's great.
Yeah.
But I have another project. I ended up getting a Department of Defense grants for multi-drug resistant organisms. Nitric oxide under pressure. It's such a small molecule, it can penetrate tissues and get right to the leading edge of bacteria. And it's wonderful. We did animal trials, intellectual property from Barry University when I left 7 years ago. And Jason Hampton, I sunk about another $300,000 to $400,000 in it. And then as we were trying to raise money, COVID hit, and all of the private equity, angel investment groups basically said, we're hunkering down, we're going to protect our current investments, so we're not making new investments. And so not all ideas that are patentable and you pour a ton of money into are going to come to fruition also, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I'm hoping we can relive that someday or bring it back because it really is a fascinating technology for patients that have significant peripheral vascular concerns, dialysis patients. I mean, we can get that infection under control without having to rely on the blood supply to get it there. So that's cool.
Yeah, that is cool.
That is interesting.
Yeah, speaking of podcasts, I listened to another podcast. It's more of a financial podcast, but they say whenever you're developing a business plan, you put on your 3D glasses, which are you're dreaming, your dream, like you're Scrooge McDuck swimming in money, everything goes to plan. Your down to earth plan, what's most likely to happen, and then the doo-doo plan when things hit the fan.
Well, we had a adage in raising money that said no matter how much money you have and no matter how your time frame for spending it in your business plan, it's either 2 times as much money that you're going to need in 3 times as long, or 3 times as much money in twice as long is your best guess. And there's a lot of truth to that. Those little sayings don't come about because there's not an element of truth to them.
Yeah.
No, absolutely.
So let's change gears here for a little bit. So you helped found the Northern Colorado residency program. So it seems as though, and I'm not inferring because you've proven it to be true, that academics and teaching are one of your passions. So what was that like starting a residency from the get-go?
We had no idea that we were going to do that. I got a call one day from Dr. Bill Todd. Todd and Terry Albright were at the Shoal College, had president and dean, I can't remember exactly, and they asked me if I could put a group of docs together and start a residency program. And so we had 3 groups that did a ton of cases. We had our group, we had a group in Greeley, Dan Hatch and his partners, and then we had James Davis and Dr. Casvin in just North Suburban Hospital, north of Denver. So we kind of put together this I-25 program, tons of cases, and we had all the connections at the hospitals for rotation, so that was good. The reason it got off the ground, though, is because Scholl offered us $100,000 of residency genesis money to fill the gap while we were waiting for Medicare dollars to come in. And so that without Scholl, we wouldn't have a program at North Colorado right now. And we loved it. I mean, I was the externship director for 10 years, and I had students from all the schools. Scholl and Des Moines, right, were our main pipeline schools, and they were our students that became residents. And it was one of the greatest joys in practice for me was also working with the students. And they were 4th-year students, of course, some third. I think we had some 3rd-year students once in a while from Scholl. But I loved it. I just loved it. And we went through the CPME, all the hoops we had to jump through to get it going. And it kind of gave me some false confidence that I knew all about accreditation. And then when I went to Barry University, I realized that the learning curve was as close to vertical as you could get. I loved it. Don't get me wrong. But it also, I kind of got lured in because if I could get all those grants in private practice, NIH grants and Department of Defense grants, I thought to myself, holy cow, what could I do with the power of a university behind me? And then I brought Rob Snyder in. He did all the clinical trials. I got the $2 million DoD grant for multi-drug resistant organisms. I mean, we were rocking and rolling from a research perspective. And it's true. I mean, if you've got the backing of a university environment, your chances of getting funding are tremendously enhanced. So It was great. The answer to your question, Jeff, is it was great. I love academics. I love the students. Like you all, there's nothing better than seeing a student progress from coming in, not knowing anything, to leaving and going to one of the top residency programs in the country.
Yeah, absolutely. We have a pretty good pipeline to Northern Colorado. A lot of our students rotate out there. Yeah. And they do a great job. They come back really well trained. I see these residents at post-graduation, and they get phenomenal training out there. So your legacy carries on.
Oh, every time I go back to Denver, I stop by my old office, and Eric Jacola and Anna Weber are there, and they've done such a wonderful job. They've added 2 more docs to the practice. A part of leaving the practice, when you make a major change like that, there's forces that are pulling you to stay and forces pulling you to leave. And one of the things that made me happy was I could leave the practice in the wonderful hands of Dr. Jacola and Dr. Weber. And speaking of inventors, Dan Hatch and I were kind of the driving forces in starting it. And Dan was influential in the Lapiplasty invention. So
I heard him. He spoke in Tampa, I think, about that quite a bit.
Yeah. Dan's a great guy. And it was a good group. Mike Fardall's the residency director. Mike's fabulous. And in fact, we were at a residency dinner one night. Once a month, we all went out for dinner and assessed our program and the curriculum and how the residents are progressing. And Mike Fardall is the one who told me that there was a dean position open in Miami, and I applied for it. And you just got to be careful what you apply for. You might get it.
Yeah. So let's spin that off into that next step. So what experience did you have in higher education? So, I mean, I know from my wife working at the school, I kind of have an inside view of higher education and how different it is from clinical practice and surgery and all that stuff. So what was your motivating force for making that jump? Because that's not only across the country, but it's a completely different job entirely.
Well, I thought I had some academic experience because I was an assistant clinical professor at the University of Colorado, right? And all their residents rotated with me. I had done 10 years worth of clerkship directing, working with all the different schools around the country. And we'd started the residency program. Probably my ace in the hole for getting the opportunity for the job was all the NIH work. I mean, that's not a lot of podiatrists are doing NIH work or Department of Defense work. Sure. So I went there, and my family stayed in Colorado for a year because my son was a senior in high school. And it was a good thing because I'd go to the office 7 or 8 in the morning. I had nothing to go home to, right? I mean, I stayed until whatever time, and I was completely immersed in the educational experience because I was also running the PA program. So I had the PA program and the DPM program. And thankfully, I had wonderful people helping me. Sanjay Sisodia, who still, works with AACPM, and he was teaching physiology. Graham Shaw, tremendous podiatric faculty. Jim Lucido, for example, was there. Jackie Brill, Tom Merrill. Everybody was wonderful, and they helped me along because I was learning a lot. What I was trying to bring to the table was more research, and I always felt that there's always a need for increasing the quality of the applicant pool. I'm starting to think that we don't want more podiatrists, we want better podiatrists, right? For a lot of reasons. We can delve into that too. But I love Barry University. They were so good to me, helping me, and I think I did a lot of good things there too. But I'll never forget. I like to tell this story. My parents were very sick. My mom had Alzheimer's. My father had vascular dementia, and they enabled me to take care of my parents in Colorado and kept me on faculty there for several years, even after I stepped down from the dean position. I'll always be very grateful for that. They're wonderful.
Yeah,
that means a lot.
So I think you did a great job down at Barry, and now you're doing a great job at Arizona. Is there anything you're terrible at? It's gotta be something.
Well, if I like big picture. I can get into the weeds quickly if I need to. I am not a micromanager in any way, shape, or form. So, there's this old saying about deans: if you do your job, the faculty will get you. If you don't do your job, the administration will get you. So you have to walk this fine line. And I always err on the side of faculty and students, always, right? And I learned a long time ago that if I could recruit a good class of students, that it would take care of my budgetary issues, my board's issues, and my residency placement issues. So admissions is everything at these colleges. And if you can get good admissions, then you can do all the other things you like to do, like research and all the other things. I'm very strong at the things I'm passionate about, and the things that I'm not good at, I delegate to people that know what they're doing. And I found that works pretty well.
That's smart. So let's dive into that a little bit, because you mentioned that. So numbers of students and applicant pools and all those things. So there's a certain subsect of the profession, we'll say, that maybe we'll say a vocal minority that does not want more competition in the field of podiatry. And you and I and lots of people know who those people might be and why they might have those feelings. But what are your thoughts on kind of the new schools? We're not going to badmouth anything. It's just, we're going to keep it positive. But what are your thoughts on new schools, more positions, more having to then drive up the applicant pool, and then our applicant numbers maybe don't produce maybe sometimes the best quality students? So what are your thoughts on that?
Wow, this is fun. This is going to take us a while because there's a lot to unpack here.
That is a deep question.
So my first answer to that is, I don't know anybody in the profession, anybody that thought it was a good idea to open 2 schools. I just have not met anybody that thinks that's a good idea because of our applicant pool issue. But what people don't understand, it's not APMA doing it, it's not AACPM doing it, and it's not CPME necessarily doing it, because CPME's job is to assess whether or not these schools can deliver a curriculum that is worthy of being a podiatric medical school. So once they prove that they can do that, the accreditation process takes off on its own. So while I say nobody was excited about the schools, they're here and we support them, right? Yes. Now, do we want more students? Let's dive into this. If we filled every seat at the 11 schools right now, we'd have 770 students. And we have about 550 first-year residency positions.
Yeah.
So if you take 10 or 15% attrition off 770, maybe you get 100 of those students not graduating, right? 120, whatever. So we're down to what? 650 students for 550 residency positions. That's not going to work.
Yeah.
So if this feet on the street proposal that we're doing, where the schools are out getting interest in podiatric medicine by advisors and students. I mean, if we bring in great students and we don't do something to control the number of students in the schools, we're going to be in a bigger problem than we are right now.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree
So
with that.
you see where I'm going with this.
Right.
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean,
This
I've
was a
talked
problem 10 years ago, right? Where we had too many students and not enough residency spots.
right. The pendulum swings, right?
Right.
It's a horrible situation. There was nothing worse when I was the dean at Miami than having a student that passed their boards, passed the curriculum, have their DPM degree, they're raring to go into a residency program, and there's no position available for them.
Mm-hmm.
And we hustled, we got them into clerkship opportunities or, preceptor opportunities where they got paid. And I would try to get an agreement with the residency director if they took that student that they would take them on as a resident the following year. But really, that was just kicking the can down the road for other students to not get a program.
Yeah.
So I have a lot of trepidation about all of this for that very reason. What CPME needs to do, and I've talked to a million people over this, is it's been over 20 years since we decided how many students each of the schools get. And it was based on a 5-year prior running enrollment. And times change, right? Admissions change, schools change, faculties change. And I think it's probably time we reassess how many students each of the schools should get to be very much in line post-attrition to have a residency position for everybody. I've done all the talking. I apologize, but I think it's an important topic.
It is.
Absolutely.
And I agree with you.
Yeah, I mean, your perspective is spot on. And I speak to a lot of clerkship and residency directors in my current position. And the general feeling I get is the power, if you will, is in the students' hands right now, in terms of them having a little more control over the situation in terms of where they match. And I kind of get the sense residencies are more marketing to get students interested in clerking with them. But as we all know, we're going to get the first class of the new schools to graduate in, I think, a year or two. And that's going to completely shift those numbers.
Yeah, we'll shift them a little bit. I think what will happen is neither of those schools have full classes, of course. But it will start shifting the numbers. You're right. But then other schools, they're seeing decreases. I mean, there's big schools that are decreasing significantly. I'm at 40, and I want to stay at 40. I don't want more than 40. I'm having a hard time getting 40 great students, right?
Yeah.
So anyways, that's my position.
It's hard because a lot of the schools are reliant on the tuition dollars for budgeting, right? They budget out, okay, this is our faculty, this is our, whether it be podiatry or outside faculty to accommodate all the learning in the schools and the facilities and all that stuff. So it's budgeted out very closely. So it sounds easy to just come along and say, hey, school A, B, and C, you can only take now this many people. So there's some downstream complications that come from that in terms of budgeting and staffing and all that stuff. So what are your thoughts on that? And what do you think would be a fair way to determine how many students each school should get?
Well, I think you should take an average of the last 5 years or so, or 3 years, because I'll just use a hypothetical. Let's say one of the schools could take 100 students. But in each of the last 3 or 4 years, they've taken 75. Well, they've probably adjusted their budgets by now to address that. Maybe 75 should be the number. And here's the other thing, I think. Instead of all these schools applying to get more numbers, I think we should be going back to variances. We should have a number and then go above the variance, because what happens is we always lose those students. I do at my school. In the irony, and you both know this at your schools, Des Moines in particular, and I don't know quite as much about Shoal, but the higher quality student you get to put a deposit, the better chance they might get picked off to go to medical school or DO school. So there's a yin and yang going on there, right? It's a double-edged sword. So I think that the best time to recruit is in the fall. That's when you get the students that are great students that want to be podiatrists. Yeah. That's where we need to put our efforts. And I think that'll work. But the budgetary thing will take care of itself. I mean, that's, Adam Smith would be proud of the profession right now. supply and demand, and people have to adjust, and students go to quality. I think there's a lot to be said for the open market. And I think that maybe, I get people that say, hey, these schools have been around for 100 years. Well, so what?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think increasing the quality of students would go a long way. Increasing the applicant pool, which thereby increases the quality of student, because right now there are students getting poached with huge offers of scholarships to go to some other schools and that's a difficult thing to compete with, because student loans are such a huge issue in America, not just in higher professional school, but I think that's one of the biggest things, ammunition that the naysayers have is, okay, well, we come out with X amount of tuition, student loans, and then the reimbursements are not as lucrative as maybe some of the other professions. So that goes back to just increasing the quality of the applicants, which then increases the quality of the students. And then if we come to a set number across the country where every school has the appropriate number, they're not over accepting and they're not under accepting, because then that means that they're probably accepting students that they probably shouldn't. It's just the nature of money makes the world go round. And there's certain few people that are going to get in there. We're going to collect their tuition dollars for a year and a half, and then they're going to fail out. And that's not fair to that student either. They shouldn't have probably gotten in the first place. And who's going to come along and be like, no, we don't want your money, you're not going to make it through? They're going to say, well, here's your fair chance, prove to us that you can. So there's so many different arms of this. It gets very complicated in a hurry.
It does. And you know what? We've seen it for years. I think that we ought to maintain a level of tuition and take fewer students. You could take 50 students at $50,000 and have the same amount of money as taking 100 students and charging them $25,000.
Which makes the dollars go round at that university. It may not be the best for that individual person to come out with that many more student loans, depending on the reimbursement and the job market. But you could also say, if we're pumping out fewer students, then the market is going to be more in demand. And that would, in theory, maybe not instantaneously, but over time, drive up the revenue cost structure that they're going to get reimbursed in the future. Right. So like you said, it all has a way of kind of working itself out. But I don't know that we're quite optimal right now in terms of student numbers, tuition dollars, and variance across the profession throughout all the schools across the country. So
no, and it's not a problem when we're struggling to get the numbers, but it'll be a bigger problem if we start getting successful with recruitment.
Yeah. So let's kind of circle on to the future of podiatric medicine. So that was kind of some of the negative behind the scenes, the Wizard of Oz behind the curtain, but the future of podiatric medicine, because the vast majority, and I kind of say this out loud because I really haven't met anyone in the profession who doesn't like it. Maybe we had a couple of people in school drop out, but they don't count because they decided early on that they didn't like it. But I really have never met anyone that doesn't like the profession. So let's spin this forward to the positive and say, okay, what is the future of podiatric medicine? Because as the numbers of good quality applicants grows, the number of good quality students and then residents and then attendings grows, and then thereby the field of podiatry is better off in the future. So what are some of the things that you are hopeful for the field of podiatry moving forward?
Well, I agree that if we have good undergrads with good MCAT scores going into the schools, you'll have better students at the schools, you'll have better residents at the residency programs. And as long as we're not flooding the schools with more students than we have residency positions, it can only raise the profession. Mm-hmm. You know, I do appreciate some of the conversations I've had, though, with docs getting through 3 years of residency and then they're not getting an institutional job. They're joining a private practice group.
Right.
They're not making as much money as they wanted. It may be owned by a private equity firm. The owners did great by selling out, but the docs that are coming in there to work are working on a salary and an incentive. In many areas of the country, you could perhaps still do private practice. I think that's the most lucrative area if you don't have a really good organizational job. But there's not going to be fewer people needing care. There's not going to be fewer feet to be treated. I think we have a niche that is incredible because you can focus on an area of podiatric medicine that you enjoy and are good at and what you've been trained in. I think we should talk about fellowships for a couple minutes too.
Yeah.
I mean, nothing's easy. I think people think that, you know, you go through this program and then you get a job and you walk in and you make $400,000 and $500,000 a year and you're working 8 to 5 and you might have to take call once a month. That's not the way the world works, right? I mean, I think it's a challenge for some of these expectations.
Yeah, I do too. Go ahead, Leland.
No, I was going to say, kind of going back to what you said initially, I completely agree. All of my peers that I graduated with, and I graduated from school in 2008, are all thriving in a lot of different roles, which is really interesting. Like regionally, and I'm sure as your peers as well too work in a lot of different scenarios, but they've all seemed to find success in their professional lives. So there's definitely a misconception that you can't be a high earner in this field, because you certainly can, but like what you said, Jeff, is no one's going to roll out the carpet for you. You have to really carve your own pathway, and I think that's what might be lacking perhaps in some of these individuals is that the lack of awareness that you still need to be able to market yourself. You need to be an advocate for yourself to be able to achieve your goals. So no one's going to do it for you.
That's absolutely right. Yeah. I don't know. I agree with what you said 100%. I remember when I was in practice, my main job, see patients, do my charts, do my surgeries, interface with the referring doctors. I tried to delegate the rest to my office managers and staff because that's what keeps patients coming in the door. But everybody's in different situations.
One more thing too, before we move on, is, and it's not always money. And I know money's important. Everyone has bills and families and loans and everything. But if you enjoy and are passionate about your role, it's going to make your life so much more fulfilling. I left, and I don't know if you remember our first conversation, but I was in a small practice in Missouri, and I was basically in the position to take over the practice in about a year or two. I was busy surgically. I was working with residents at the SSM DePaul program, which is in St. Louis. And so, I mean, I was poised to make, multiple 6-figure income. And I kind of left it on the table because it really wasn't the right fit for me. I mean, I wasn't designed necessarily to be a small business owner. My passion lied in educating residents and moving towards the role that I'm in today. And, again, my earning potential is nowhere near, I think, what it would have been, but my fulfillment and my, just being, coming to work, not being anxious on a Sunday night, like when we're recording this, that we have work tomorrow. And, I'm kind of excited to get in the front line with our students again. So that has to come into the equation too, I think.
Yeah. One of the benefits of the profession is that we always talk about the work-life balance. So I could make a whole lot more money than I do, but I choose not to. I don't work Wednesday afternoons. I don't work Friday afternoons. And I try to take off Tuesday afternoons too, because I would rather spend time with my family. I would rather travel. I would rather do, life, right? And at some point life passes you by. And if you are so caught up on making money and paying off your student loans, and then I've mentioned it on a previous episode, but my mom always said you could get hit by a bus tomorrow. Which I found morbid, but probably good advice. Like, live for today and, enjoy things. So we get caught up on the money and the reimbursements and the insurance, and do you take insurance? Do you not? And the direct care model and all this stuff is like, just, are you happy or are you not happy? Because if you're not happy, we have to take a look in the mirror and figure out what's going on here. But it sounds like the three of us are happy. So that we know that the field can provide us happiness and a good living. So
I'm telling you, like, I blinked and my daughter's starting high school next month, so I'm not sure how that happened.
Same, and it is crazy. I mean, I think back to when I was in private practice. I took almost a month off and went up and climbed Mount McKinley in Alaska. I took
awesome.
A couple weeks and went down climbing in South America. I mean, we did really cool vacations all the time, and that's the thing you're going to remember with the family and things, not grinding out like you said, Jeff.
And you most likely won't be doing that when you're, 70, 75, 80. I mean, just logistically, the chances of that, some people are healthier than others, but logistically, it's difficult to do some of those things. You might think, oh, I'll travel when I retire. Well, maybe yes, maybe no. So I think that's important. Take some time during your career and set it aside and say, okay, these people will be here when I get back. My wife and I have a very different ability to turn it off. When I hit the doorstep on Friday afternoon, like poof, out of sight, out of mind, like not my problem. I'm watching the Hawkeye football game and I am focusing on the stuff that matters, family, but mostly football, a little bit of family. No, I'm just kidding. So I have the ability to turn it off. And she, constantly is thinking about, oh, well, I could have done that differently. So it's interesting how different personalities exist within the field. But yeah, I think it's important to be able to kind of separate yourself from your profession and what you do on a daily basis and spend time doing things that matter to you.
I think I'm more like Ashley. I sometimes have a hard time. Like when I go out of town on a vacation, it takes me a good, 36 hours to like really forget about what's happening back home. So I wish I had that skill. I always remember, do you guys ever watch the sitcom Scrubs?
Yeah.
With Zach Braff. Yeah. Well, there was the chief of medicine, his name was Dr. Kelso, and he was just like really angry, like curmudgeon-y guy. And as soon as his foot hit the front step outside of the hospital, he was like a jolly old guy whistling and just yeah, exactly.
The second Kelso's foot hits the bottom of those stairs, he doesn't have a care in the world.
Like I need to develop that skill.
Yeah, that's interesting. I think I fall maybe somewhere in between. I've never taken vacation and put a message on my email that I'm going on vacation. I answer emails when I'm on vacation. I enjoy it. I feel like I'm caught up and it calms me.
Me too.
That's how I look at it. But that doesn't mean I'm not on vacation. I'm in, I shoot targets, right? I shoot targets competitively. I'm in Hungary or Italy or Portugal or Spain shooting targets. And at night, I'm checking my emails. It's just where awesome. I am.
Yeah.
So how'd you get into that?
Yeah, that's pretty interesting.
Well, my kids' athletic abilities outpaced my ability to coach them. And in about 2008, I stopped coaching baseball, stopped coaching soccer, and I needed to find something to do. And a friend introduced me to sporting clay shooting with shotguns. But I kind of got hooked. It's like golf, right? Or it's like apparently pickleball nowadays. You start shooting targets, you start competing, you try to get better, you get a coach, you start traveling, you're looking for good competitive targets. I see my buddies I shoot with from Minnesota and Florida more than I see my next door neighbors because we congregate at the same tournaments. So that's kind of a great way to turn it off, because when you're shooting targets, you're not thinking about the applicant pool or the curriculum review or anything like that.
Budgeting,
absolutely.
All that stuff.
Oh, I used to go ski shooting.
The key to budgets, though, is bringing in great students, Jeff. That's covered.
Let's do it. We're doing it right now.
I used to go ski shooting in the Ozarks. A friend of mine had some property out there, and we would go down there and do target shooting and skeet shooting. And yeah, that is a good way to alleviate stress.
Absolutely. And, everybody's got something, right? Everybody does their thing. That's what I do. So it's fun.
I love that.
So you have been quite involved in research over the years. So I think research can be somewhat intimidating for people, just the nature of starting a project. And then what do I do? Do I need IRB approval? The Institutional Review Board, do I need IRB approval? How do I start this project? And then what do I do with it? So what would be your advice to anybody, students, residents, attendings? Because I think it's easier maybe when you're a student or a resident to kind of work with an attending at your program or at your school, but you get out into practice and you got so many things going on. I got kids, I got family, I have my job, I have everything going on. It's hard to focus on that. So what would your advice be to someone who wants to kind of get into research?
Whether you're a student or particularly a resident is where you can really get in the groove. Doing a paper, literature reviews, getting involved in a clinical trial if you have the opportunity, doing just a white paper to a company and say, hey, I love your product. I want to use it. I want to do it on a series of 10 consecutive patients. What do you think? Kind of thing. That works. For me, I loved writing grants. Once I got into it, I would take Wednesdays off, go up to the mountains, and we had a place up in Frisco near Breckenridge, and I would put on a cup of coffee and just write grants all day long on a Wednesday. Some people went skiing. I did a little cross country skiing, but my knees weren't into the big mountains. So
Yeah.
I think you have to have a passion for it. But heck, research was great because I always said, the cake is my practice, right? My patients, my surgeries, my day-to-day work. And then research was like icing on the cake. And it was really incredible, the opportunities research can give you. The thing that I found was that I had to have tremendous delayed gratification for NIH work, because a lot of times you don't get it on your first submission. It goes to a section group, they do an analysis, they send you back, you need to do this, 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 and this. And so I used to sit, I remember when the NIH would send out their priority scores for funding, you had to get, under 250 or whatever. It was like golf, the lower the better. And I remember when the mail came, I grabbed the mail at the office like a little kid, ripping it open and saying, "What's my score?" And if it was like 150 or 139 or 100, I knew I'd get funding. If it was like 195 or 210, I wasn't quite sure. So it was almost like a competitive little game writing grants. I just loved it. And so I think research is fun for a lot of people. The intimidation part, Jeff, I agree with you. I don't like doing analysis, like statistical analysis. So you got to have people doing that for you. It's like podcasting. You dive in head first and then you shake it down as you go. That's what I found.
That's good advice.
Yeah. I mean, when I came over to Shoal, I had very little research experience. I mean, I did some work as a student, but finding a good mentor too was really helpful for me. So having our dean, Dr. Wu, was one of my mentors in school, but also when I started getting interested in research. So super helpful as well too, having someone that's already been through those trenches before.
Yeah, interesting. This is kind of a similar experience. So Stephanie and I wrote an article in Diabetes Care about why it's hard to do the right thing, and we're talking about appropriate offloading. So I had the residents send. They sent like 5,000, I think, faxes back in the mid 2000s to podiatrists with a questionnaire. Okay. And then they'd fax back the answers, and then we put everything together. And because I was in private practice, I didn't have the ability to do statistical analysis and things because it was like my own project. So I teamed up with David Armstrong and Stephanie at the Shoal College. They did all the analysis. Together we wrote the paper. So you got to be creative and you got to reach out. And I've never felt that people are going to like get my ideas or steal my ideas, because that usually doesn't happen. Usually people work collaboratively in a way that you're better off than you were before.
Yeah. Speaking of Podiatry Famous, one of my earlier days when I was speaking, I think it was actually at the conference in Nebraska, but sitting front row was Dave Armstrong, and I was really nervous because my topic had something to do with diabetes, and I was like, I cannot mess this up. In fact, half of my references were probably his articles, so it was not comfortable.
Yeah, Dave and I were in school. I was 2 years ahead of him in California. So when I was leaving Kern, it was a PSR 24 at the time, he was coming in. So I've known Dave forever. But my favorite story about Dave is we were doing every year we did an NBA fantasy league with all the attendings at the hospital and all the residents, and we do it on a chalkboard. And Dave was there as a clerk, I think it was, and Dave says, no. He pulled out his little laptop. Mind you, it's like 1993, right? He pulls out a laptop, puts on like whatever the Excel spreadsheet of the day was, plugs it into the printer, prints it out, and hands us all the fantasy draft printed out off his laptop. I mean, he was ahead of his time in the early 90s, trust me.
Yeah.
That's impressive.
He's been a tremendous advocate for podiatry worldwide, and I give David a lot of credit. He's tremendous.
Absolutely. The other day I was talking about my Palm Pilot to my students that didn't know what I was talking about.
Right. I remember when it was just not that long ago when I would go to a hotel to give a lecture, and to get online, you had to have like a physical plug-in. There wasn't Wi-Fi. You just jumped online.
Ethernet cable. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. And if sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't, kind of stuff.
That's funny.
All right. Anything else you want to touch on before we go, Dr. Jensen?
No. I just want to thank you guys for having me. I appreciate all you're doing for the profession. I think that the more podcasts we put out there, if you're consistent and reliable, and relevant, we're going to continue to see more and more views, and hopefully we do get to those undergrads, and we do, highlight our profession in a way that everybody's proud of. So I commend you guys for doing that.
Well, thank you. So I think we work in unison together. So thanks for what you do for the profession as well, and blazing the trail in podcasting. So thank you so much for joining us today.
You're so welcome. Anytime, guys. Have a wonderful rest of the weekend.
Yeah, and where can people find you that they're looking for you online?
I'm on LinkedIn, Jeffrey Jensen. I'm on YouTube, Dean's Chat, Spotify and Apple. Just plug in Dean's Chat; it'll come up. I'm at the university, so I'm not hard to find.
Sure, perfect.
He's around.
Absolutely.
Right.
Well, thank you for taking the time. I find you're one of the easiest people to speak with. Your demeanor and your just a pleasure to talk to. So thank you.
You guys make it easy. Thank you.
Absolutely. Well, thanks for joining us, Dr. Jensen, for another episode of Paw Patrol with your host, Dr. Jeff Dykes.
And Dr. Leland Jaffe.
We'll see you guys next time.
Bye now.
Take care.